off with our lead story. President Johnson initiated Operation Rolling Thunder as of March 1965. Ho Chi Minh of North Vietnam is spreading his communist plague across the country. Bombings in Vietnam are dramatically escalating and will last until 68. Numbers of soldiers being sent into Vietnam are subsequently rising as more and more men are called down through the draft.
In 1964, North Vietnamese forces shot down our destroyers in the Gulf of Tonkin. On August 2nd, the Maddox was shot down, and on the 4th, the Turner Joy was allegedly shot down. In response, Congress passed the resolution allowing Mr. Johnson to use all means necessary to enforce peace and safety in the country. The NVA has continued to show hostility and obvious intent to spread communism in the South.
To protect those in South Vietnam, Mr. President has set out to continue Operation Rolling Thunder. In total, has dropped 864,000 tons of bombs and is sending more troops into the country. In February of 1965, he had initially sent 3,500 troops into the country. In the span of 1 year, that number has escalated into 205,000.
Here's Julia, live from Vietnam.
This is Julia, live from Vietnam. I am in a South Vietnamese village accompanying a combat unit on their mission to search and destroy the Viet Cong. We have been under heavy fire all afternoon, and several soldiers have been medevaced. Back to the station.
We encourage all families to prepare for the war within their homes. Men must be ready for war, and women must be ready to defend our country's integrity on the home front.
Our soldiers are facing immense dangers when fighting against the Viet Cong, facing deathly traps and terrains. However, their bravery is what upholds the strength of our country. We ask you all to respect and take care of these soldiers.
In other news, tonight we finally uncover the full story of the mission at the Bay of the Pigs. It all started back in 1959 when Fidel Castro rose to power in an armed revolt against Fulgencio Batista. Amidst the Cold War tensions, government officials grew weary of Cuba's relationship with the communist Soviet Union. The mission was set in place under former President Dwight D. Eisenhower and approved on March of 1960. The CIA planned a secret attack on Cuban shores of the Bay of the Pigs along the southwest coast, training Cuban exiles in a revolt against Castro. In February of 1961, after his inauguration, President Kennedy was given the information on the invasion, and he was determined to disguise U.S. support. Our intelligence suggested that the Cuban people would be in support of this mission. However, the results proved otherwise. The ultimate goal of this operation was to overthrow Castro's regime and establish a non-communist government, friendly with the United States, satisfying the long-running containment policy our government had adopted post-World War II. The first mishap occurred on April 15th of 1961 when 8 bombers left Nicaragua to bomb Cuban airfields. The CIA had used old World War II bombers and had painted them in disguise of Cuban Air Force planes. However, the bombers had missed most of their marks, leaving Castro's supplies intact.
Pictures and evidence of U.S. support of the invasion were leaked, leading JFK to cancel the second airstrike. Finally, on April 17, 1961, the Brigade 2506 consisted of 1,500 Cuban exiles led by Jose Mira Cardona, a former member of Castro's government, as the head of the Cuban Revolutionary Council, an exile committee. If the invasion was a success, he was set to be the new president. Immediately after landing, the force was met under heavy fire, and the location of the invasion remained a disappointment as the Bay of Pigs was a remote, swampy area scattered with sharp reefs and little infrastructure, making a large-scale invasion a challenge. Cuban planes strafed the invaders, sank 2 escort ships, and destroyed half of the exiles' air support. Bad weather hampered the ground force, which had to work with soggy equipment and insufficient ammunition. Over the next 24 hours, Castro led his counterattack. He sent 20,000 troops toward the beaches, and the Cuban forces now controlled the skies. President Kennedy authorized an air umbrella at dawn on April 19th. 6 unmarked American fighter planes took off to help defend the brigade's B-26 aircraft. But the planes arrived an hour late. They were shot down by the Cubans, and the invasion was crushed later that day. Some exiles escaped to the sea, while the rest were killed or rounded up and imprisoned by Castro's forces. Almost 1,200 members of Brigade 2506 surrendered, and more than 100 were killed. These prisoners remained in Cuba for 20 months as Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy negotiated a deal with Castro. The mission was overall a failure, with Cuba's people rallying behind Castro's regime, becoming a more unified communist state.
Now to Julia, as she attempts to get a comment from President Kennedy.
Mr. President, do you have a comment on the failed mission at the Bay of Pigs?
Mr. President?
Today, on October 25, 1962, tensions reached a boiling point. United States Ambassador Eli Stevenson blew his top on Soviet Ambassador Valerian Zorin in the Security Council of the United Nations. On October 16, pictures from U-2 spy planes revealed that the Soviet Union has moved nuclear missiles into Cuba and is constructing missile bases. President Kennedy addressed the nation on these findings 3 days ago. The president also created an executive committee for the National Security Council to handle the crisis. The nuclear missiles in Cuba are capable of launching to almost any location in the United States, and the country is in a state of emergency.
President Kennedy spoke with many officials, including former Presidents Hoover, Truman, and Eisenhower, on how to deal with the situation. The two main options were an airstrike, an invasion, or a naval quarantine. President Kennedy's decision is to place a naval quarantine around Cuba until the Soviet Union takes down the missile bases.
Prior to his address to the nation, President Kennedy wrote to Premier Nikita Khrushchev warning of the gravity and foolishness of the Soviet Union's actions in Cuba. As the naval quarantine went into place 2 days ago, Eli Stevenson, ambassador to the United Nations, brought up the Soviet Union's actions to the United Nations. President Kennedy wrote another letter to Premier Khrushchev asking him to keep Russian ships from going to Cuba.
Yesterday, on October 24th, Khrushchev responded to Kennedy, accusing the United States of intimidation and making unreasonable demands. Now, today, the situation reached a boiling point during an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council. Mr. Adlai Stevenson is the United States chief delegate at the United Nations, and he is known for his courteous, patient demeanor. But when Zorin, the Soviet Union's ambassador, avoided Stevenson's question, quote, "Do you, Ambassador Zorin, deny that the USSR has placed and is placing medium and intermediate range missiles in sites in Cuba?" Stevenson broke his normally courteous demeanor and continued to pressure Zorin for an answer.
I'm prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over, if that's your decision. And I'm also prepared to present the evidence in this room.
The country continues to wait on the brink of nuclear war with the Soviet Union. The result of this grave crisis is still unknown, but we will keep you updated.
Today, on July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong became the first human to walk on the moon. Neil Armstrong, along with Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins, are a part of the Apollo 11 space mission. The moon landing will go down in history as one of America's greatest achievements. As Neil Armstrong took his first steps on the lunar surface, he uttered the words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind."
After years of hard work, NASA scientists accomplished the feat of landing on the moon before the Soviets. Although the Soviet Union achieved Sputnik, the first satellite into space, and Yuri Gagarin, the first human into space, NASA's great accomplishment no doubt settles the space race.
The goal of landing on the moon was started by President John F. Kennedy 8 years ago in 1961. He set the challenge of landing on the moon before the end of the decade.
The scientists at NASA had to thoroughly test every aspect of this mission. Tragedy struck on January 27, 1967, when a manned test of the launch pad for the Apollo spacecraft caught fire and killed 3 astronauts. The Apollo project cost the government a total of $24 billion.
Now, let's go over to the moon itself. Apollo 11 launched from the Kennedy Space Center at 9:32 a.m. on July 16th. After getting into lunar orbit on July 19th, the lunar module Eagle descended to the moon, touching lunar soil at 4:17 p.m. At 10:56 p.m., Armstrong stepped off the ladder and onto lunar soil.
Now, the astronauts are back on the lunar spacecraft, waiting to reunite with Michael Collins and the command module. Here's Alicia with a special interview with Neil Armstrong.
Mr. Armstrong, first of all, it is an honor to be speaking with you today. I think everybody's wondering, what is it like to be on the moon?
It is beautiful up here. It looks like the high desert of the USA. Most people think that the moon would be cold, but it's actually really hot on the moon, about 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Our spacesuits are water cooled, luckily. The gravity is also less than on Earth, so that made walking a little bit different than down there.
Wow, that's incredible. What did you and the other crew members have to do to train for this mission?
Like I said, the moon looks quite similar to some deserts in the USA. The scientists at NASA knew this, and they took us to locations with similar topography to the moon. We practiced collecting rock samples over and over. I could probably do it in my sleep if you asked me to. No one has ever been to the moon before. This is all very new.
Tragedy struck at 6:05 p.m. on Thursday, April 4th, 1968, as Martin Luther King was shot dead while standing on the balcony outside of room 306 on the second floor of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee.
King was the symbol of the civil rights movement, as he was best known for the Montgomery bus boycott, civil disobedience, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and his famous I Have a Dream speech. His death has prompted massive outbreaks of racial violence, resulting in more than 40 deaths nationwide and extensive property damage in over 100 cities around the country.
Wednesday, April 3rd, King had arrived in Tennessee to prepare for the march the following Monday on behalf of the striking Memphis sanitation workers. He was leaving the motel for a dinner at the home of Memphis minister Samuel Billy Kiles. King stepped onto the balcony of the room to speak to some of his Southern Christian Leadership Conference colleagues standing in the parking lot area below.
At the same time, a man fired one shot, causing severe wounds on the lower right side of King's face. An ambulance rushed King to St. Joseph's Hospital, where doctors pronounced him dead at 7:05 p.m. The next day, President Lyndon B. Johnson announced April 7th as a day of mourning for the nation grieving, the icon of the enduring civil rights movement.
On April 8th, public libraries, museums, schools, and businesses were closed, and the Academy Awards ceremony and numerous other sporting events were postponed. King's widow, Coretta Scott King, and other family members joined thousands of participants in a march in Memphis honoring King and support of the sanitation workers.
On April 9th, 1968, the nation mourned together at his funeral, attended by many of the nation's political and civil rights leaders, including Jacqueline Kennedy, Vice President Hubert Humphrey, and Ralph Bunche. Morehouse College President Benjamin Mays delivered a heartfelt eulogy. Over 100,000 mourners followed two mules pulling King's coffin through the streets of Atlanta. After another ceremony on the Morehouse campus, King's body was initially interred at Southview Cemetery. Eventually, it was moved to a crypt next to the Ebenezer Church at the King Center. Shortly after the assassination, authorities found a rifle near the motel.
Fingerprints uncovered in the apartment matched those of James Earl Ray, a fugitive who had escaped from Missouri prison in April of 1967. On 19th of July, 1968, Ray was extradited to the United States from Britain to stand trial. In a plea bargain, Tennessee prosecutors agree in March of 1969 to forego seeking the death penalty when Ray pleaded guilty to murder charges.
This became the source of controversy, sparking his sentence to 99 years in prison. President Johnson pressured Congress to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1968 in tribute to King's work. The Fair Housing Act stands as the final great legislative achievement of the Civil Rights era. The end of a powerful era of change, King has done so much to make this country a better place. May he rest in peace.
Today, on May 2nd, 1968, over 1,000 demonstrators occupied Nassau Hall, the administrative heart of Ivy League Princeton University, with a sit-in. Students and certain faculty members, notably including University President Robert F. Goheen, here at Princeton, peacefully lined the hallways, issuing a list of anti-Vietnam War demands, especially to address the university's participation is classified research in the Institute of Defense Analyses, as well as for allowing military recruitment for the ongoing Vietnam War on campus. Participants were led by members of Students for a Democratic Society, otherwise known as SDS, a national left-wing group which had its beginnings in the early 1960s with the goal of motivating participation in various social movements and protests such as this one. They became especially active in the early 1960s against the Vietnam War, especially when Lyndon B. Johnson instituted the draft for the Vietnam War. This is, however, not the first time members of SDS organized an anti-Vietnam War protest here at Nassau Hall. In October of last year, 1967, The Princeton members of SDS organized a sit-in to demand that the university sever ties with a defense contractor. As conflicts escalated, police had to intervene, resulting in 31 student arrests. Anti-war sentiments in the area have been accumulating for over a year, contributing to the rising arguments in the university's involvement with the Department of Defense, as well as the U.S.'s involvement in Vietnam. The protest today at Nassau Hall is expected to last into the early morning, but with many currently being peacefully removed by campus and local police, but in fact met with disciplinary actions.
Women across the world have been calling for equal rights and joining the new wave of feminism. Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, written in February of 1963, has critiqued society's treatment of women, claiming that they're dissatisfied from confinement to the home, which in turn spoils the kids.
This sentiment has resonated with women across the country, as they now advocate for higher education, better jobs, and equal pay. To acknowledge this concern about pay, President Kennedy signed the Equal Pay Act into law on June of 1963 as part of his new Frontier Plan, aimed to eliminate inequality in the workplace.
Also brought back into discussion is the Equal Rights Act. Despite being vetoed in 1923, our new group of feminists are persistent. Author of The Feminine Mystique, Betty Friedan, alongside 27 other co-founded, established the National Organization for Women, the NOW, in 1966. This group has been placing pressure upon the government to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, a conflict yet to be solved.
Finally, all clean. After a day's work, I can finally
Oh my
rest.
goodness, you will not believe who I saw when I was walking the dog.
Do you wish someone would invent a cup that cleans its own spills? Well, we've got the next best thing. Bounty cleans up messes quicker and absorbs more than the leading paper brand of towels, just like magic. Why invent a self-cleaning cup when you have Bounty, the quicker picker-upper?
Wow, look at it go. It's got a mind of its own. If you're up for some fun, stop by your local toy store and purchase AJ Slinkies.
I love my Slinky. It keeps me entertained for hours.
I also love AJ Slinkies.
It never gets old. Go buy an AJ Slinky today.
January 15th, 1967, a day that the Green Bay Packers of the NFL will forever remember as being the day that they made history by beating AFL's Kansas City Chiefs 35-10 in the first ever AFL-NFL World Championship Super Bowl at the Memorial Coliseum in Los Angeles. With 60 million viewers on the other side of the screen, fans watched as the underdogs, the Kansas City Chiefs, held their own throughout the beginning of the game, ending the first half only down 14-10.
Their joy was short-lived as the Chiefs' one and only touchdown was scored in the second quarter of the game with a 7-yard pass from quarterback Len Dawson to Curtis McClinton, after which safety Willie Wood intercepted Dawson's pass and returned the ball 50 yards to set up a touchdown. In the second half, the Green Bay Packers crushed any hopes of Chiefs fans by scoring 3 more touchdowns, with Elijah Pitts running in 2 touchdowns and backup end Max McGee, who came in place of Boyd Dowler after his injury on the 6th play of the game, scoring the 3rd.
When all was said and done, the Green Bay Packers further basked in their historic win, with the Packers' famous quarterback Brian Bartlett, Bart Starr, being named MVP after the game.
On a more fashionable note, British designer Mary Quant's miniskirt has made it big in America. Quant shortened the hemline of her skirt and named it after Mini Cooper car. Women across the country have adopted the style and can be seen on the streets wearing all sorts of variations of these skirts. Striped, colorful, dotted. You name it, we've worn it. Even our very own First Lady, Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy, can be seen wearing these skirts. A major influence for young women's fashion, Mrs. Kennedy sets the trends with bright colors, poofy hair, and statement sunglasses.
Today, the Beatles take stage in Las Vegas for their world tour. Beatlemania first took the United States by storm on February 9, 1964, when they appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show. On April 4, 1964, the Beatles broke a new record. Their songs held the top 5 positions on the Billboard Pop chart, a feat not accomplished by any single group or individual so far.
The Beatles, consisting of John Lennon, Ringo Starr, and Paul McCartney, and George Harrison are all British natives. Before their fast rising popularity in the United States, they were first popular in Britain. Their long hair, new style, and experimental music gained them great popularity among the youth, although many parents expressed disapproval of these new styles.
We have a special interview with John Lennon before he takes the stage in Las Vegas for the Beatles World Tour. Julia, to you.
Hi, Mr. Lennon. How did it feel to hold the top 5 spots on the Billboard Pop chart?
It felt amazing, like all our hard work had paid off. We are super grateful for the opportunity to perform a world tour.
Some parents disapprove of your band's style and music. What do you have to say about that?
Well, that's the parents' problem, not ours. We've got a whole concert filled with people who appreciate our music.
What do you think about the events in Vietnam?
Yeah, you interviewers like to ask us about Vietnam. I believe in peace, and I believe that what is happening in Vietnam is working against peace.
One last question. What's going through your mind as you see these massive crowds of people?
It's great to see the love given to us by the United States.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lennon, for taking the time to talk with us. Back to you.
On a lighter note, our very own Miracle on Ice Olympic ice hockey squad has defeated the Soviets in a narrow victory. On February 27, 1960, U.S. ice hockey team led by Jack Riley beat the Soviets 3-2 in the semifinals at the Winter Games in Blythe Arena in Squaw Valley, California. Jack Riley, the head coach, was a former player in 1948 and a head coach at West Point. This victorious team was comprised of amateurs and college boys.
Despite being the clear underdogs in the game, the team managed to win its first 4 games against Czechoslovakia, Australia, Sweden, and Germany, then surprisingly scored an upset victory over Canada and went on to meet the Soviets in the semifinal round on February 27th. This game is a victory for the whole of America. Bystanders say, quote, "When the buzzer went off, the crowd cheered because the underdog U.S. squad was now in the driver's seat to win its first ever Olympic gold medal in hockey."
Anyways, folks, thanks for tuning into your local news. On behalf of all of us here at JAB News, see you next time.